Over the last lectures, we had a look at many new features, many core concepts you use a lot when working with Flutter, but now it's time to continue working on the actual app and what we see there. And of course, there the goal is to have a button which we can press to roll a dice. And therefore it makes sense to, as a next step, show a dice on the screen, show some dice images. For that, attached to this video, you find a zip file, which you can download and extract, and in there you find a couple of image files. Now you should add those files to your project in order to then use them in your code. For that, in your project folder, add a new folder, which can be named Assets. This name is up to you, but Assets makes sense since we're about to store some images, some assets that we'll use in this application. And in this assets folder, you could even create a subfolder called images in case you had other kind of assets in this project as well, which we don't have here, but still it doesn't hurt to have this subfolder structure. Now you should drag and drop all those image files which were attached into this images folder in your assets folder. And in order to use them in your code, in your project then, you also have to go to the pubspec.yaml file. And in that file, scroll down until you find this commented out assets part here. Now you can comment this in by simply removing these hash symbols here. And you should make sure that you have one level of indentation here by hitting the tab key. And then you add a list of all the assets, all the images, for example, that should be available in your application. Just adding these files in your project folder is not enough. If you want to be able to display these images in your app, you have to register them here. And for that, you have to specify a relative path, the relative path to the images that should be included. So in my case, assets, since I have this assets folder, /images, since I have that images subfolder, and then the name of the images. Dice1 PNG, but then also Dice2, Dice3, Dice4, Dice5, and Dice6 PNG. All these image paths should be added here to assets in your pubspec.yaml file. Now with that added, you can use those images in your code. And here we could do this in gradient container instead of this text. Because this text here is not needed right now, instead here I want to output one of these images, and later we will add logic to change this image dynamically. Now to output an image, we can use the built-in image widget, which is provided by Flutter. You can create it like this to then set an image, but for that you need a so-called image provider, which is another object which in the end resolves to a certain image. This could be done, but if you have a locally stored image, so such an asset which we just registered in the pubspec.yaml file, there is a quicker way of referencing that. You can use image dot and then the asset constructor function. Now this is using a feature built into Dart where you can define multiple constructor functions in a given class. We could do this in our own classes as well. For example, here in gradient container, we have this default constructor function, but we could also add a second constructor function by again using our class name, and then dot, and then the actual constructor function we want to use. For example, purple, to then, for example, set color 1 to some hard-coded deep purple value like this. And then separated by a comma, you could and should also set color 2 to some predefined value, like colors indigo. Then you could add cons here, and also accept that named key parameter. And now you would have an alternative constructor function that can be used whenever a gradient container is used, so that instead of using it like this and passing those specific colors to it, you could use the purple constructor function, which here could act as a convenience constructor function with some predefined colors. And it's totally up to you what you would want to do in such additional constructor functions. Here I'll go back to the previous usage, but it is important to understand that you can simply add multiple constructor functions to the same class. And that's in the end what we're using here with this asset function. Image has a default constructor function used like this. and then multiple alternative constructor functions, which simply make adding an image a bit easier. For example, here, when using the asset constructor function, you pass a string to it, the name of the image, or to be precise, the path to the image, which in this case would be assets, image, and then, for example, dice2.png. Now here I then get an error, because actually I should remove the const keyword, because this image widget is in the end a dynamic widget, which isn't guaranteed to be const, so we must remove this const keyword to avoid errors. But with that, we have this image here, and since we now got rid of that styled text, we can also get rid of this import. And if you now save everything and force a reload of the application with this image added here, you should also see an image here on the screen. Though in my case I got a typo here, this should be assets/images. The correct path, of course, is important. And with that, I now see my dice here. Now it's a bit big, and thankfully the asset constructor function allows for additional configuration by adding another argument to it. In this case, the width argument, which you could, for example, set to 200 pixels. And with that, this looks much better, and now we have a smaller dice image here. So this is how you can display images on the screen, and this is how you can work with multiple constructor functions.